The thick carpet of St. James's Palace muffled the footsteps of the page boys as they scurried past the door of the sovereign's private study, but it could not muffle the sound of pure, unadulterated rage that suddenly erupted from within. King Charles III, a man who had waited a lifetime for his crown and was known for his meticulous, often obsessive attention to detail, was staring at the final proof of the coronation ceremony program. His face, usually capable of a practiced royal neutrality, was contorted in a mask of shock and fury. He jabbed a trembling finger at a specific line in the text, his voice a low, dangerous growl that cut through the tense silence of the room. "Where," he demanded, his eyes locking onto a senior aide, "is the Princess Royal? Where is my sister's name?" The room, populated by private secretaries and palace courtiers who had overseen every minute detail of the historic event for months, felt as though the very air had been sucked out of it. The king's question hung in the air, unanswered for a beat too long. He didn't need them to point it out. He could see it with his own eyes. In the section detailing the order of service, the processions, and the list of senior royals participating in the historic recognition of the new monarch, one name was conspicuously, inexcusably absent. Anne, the Princess Royal, the Queen's only daughter and the monarch's fiercest, most loyal supporter, had been completely omitted. For a moment, a flicker of something else crossed the king's face, a deep, profound hurt. Anne was not just his sister, she was his anchor. In the tumultuous seas of their dysfunctional family, she was the one constant. While he had been away at school, while their parents' relationship had been strained, while the world had descended into a frenzy over his marriages, Anne had been a steadfast, if sometimes prickly, presence. She was the one who understood the unspoken language of their shared childhood, the weight of their birthright that they had both carried since the day they were born. To see her name erased from the most important day of his life was not just a procedural error, it was a personal affront of the highest order. And he knew, with a sinking feeling in the gut that had nothing to do with his lunch, that there was only one person in the world who would have the audacity to do such a thing. Camilla, the Queen, had been preparing for this moment for decades. From the outside, she appeared to be the epitome of calm, the devoted wife who had stood by her man through scandal and public scorn to finally ascend to the throne. But those who knew the inner workings of the palace understood that Camilla played a long game, and she played it with a quiet, relentless determination. The omission of Anne's name was not a clerical mishap. It was a surgical strike. It was the final move in a chess match that had been playing out for over 50 years, a silent war for position and primacy within the most famous family in the world. The relationship between the two women had always been a study in icy civility. Anne, who valued duty, service, and an almost religious adherence to protocol above all else, had never warmed to the woman who had caused her brother such scandal and heartache. She remembered the 1970s, when she herself had dated Camilla's future husband, Andrew Parker Bowles, before Camilla swept in and married him. She had watched from the wings as Camilla's affair with Charles had destroyed his marriage to Diana, a catastrophe that Anne, a pragmatist to her core, viewed as an unforgivable lapse in royal judgment that had damaged the institution they were all sworn to protect. For years, Anne had maintained a polite distance, but that distance had turned to active resentment in the months leading up to the coronation. The gradual, carefully managed rebranding of Camilla from Duchess of Cornwall to Queen Consort, and then, defiantly, to simply Queen, had grated on Anne. She knew her mother, the late Queen Elizabeth II, had made her sincere wish clear, that Camilla be known as Queen Consort. To Anne, who lived by the word and will of her mother, the dropping of the consort title was a blatant disrespect of the late monarch's final wishes. It was a power grab, pure and simple. And now, this. The coronation program was the definitive historical record of the day a new sovereign was anointed. By deleting Anne's name, Camilla was attempting to write her out of history, to ensure that all the attention, all the glory, would be focused squarely on the new king and his queen, with no distracting presence from the past. As Charles erupted, the courtiers scrambled. One brave soul stammered that the initial draft had come from the Queen's private office, that it was assumed to be a final, approved version. This only fueled the king's fire. He knew then it was a deliberate act. He knew that his wife, in her quest to solidify her position, had crossed a line that would have devastating consequences. The shouting could be heard by secretaries in the outer hallway. He demanded the program be pulled, be reprinted, whatever the cost. But the head printer shook his head gravely. Tens of thousands of copies had already been printed, bound, and shipped to media outlets, foreign dignitaries, and VIP guests around the globe. The cost of reprinting was astronomical, but more importantly, the logistics were impossible. The king was faced with an impossible choice. Let the world see his sister publicly snubbed on his crowning day, or cause an international incident by delaying the program. He slumped back in his chair, the weight of the crown he had yet to wear pressing down on him heavier than ever before. The battle lines had been drawn, not in some distant foreign field, but at the very heart of his own family, and the ceremony intended to unite the nation behind him threatened to tear his house apart. The atmosphere at Buckingham Palace in the days following the program debacle was described by one insider as a toxic swamp. King Charles was not speaking to his wife, a state of marital Cold War that was impossible to hide from their closest staff. Camilla, for her part, retreated to her private quarters at Clarence House, maintaining a facade of injured innocence. She insisted to her own small circle of advisors, merely trying to streamline the ceremony, to focus on the new reign. The inclusion of the Princess Royal, with her specific roles and historical precedents, complicated the narrative they were trying to build. One of a modern, slimmed-down monarchy with the king and queen as its undisputed shining center. Anne was a relic of the old guard, a reminder of a past that Camilla had spent 2 decades trying to live down. Princess Anne, meanwhile, was at her country home, Gatcombe Park. The news of her omission reached her not through an official apology or a panicked phone call from her brother, but through a journalist who called her office for comment. If she felt the sting of the insult, she showed absolutely no sign of it. Anne was renowned for her stoicism, her complete lack of vanity, and her sheer, indefatigable work ethic. She had inherited her father, Prince Philip's bluntness, and her mother's sense of duty. While Charles and Camilla fumed in London, Anne was preparing for a solo engagement in the Midlands, opening a new agricultural college. To the outside world, it was business as usual, but privately the snub crystallized something in her mind that she had suspected for years. Camilla was not just trying to be Charles's wife, she was trying to erase the memory of Diana and, by extension, diminish the influence of anyone connected to the old royal family that had been so hesitant to accept her. The historical irony was not lost on royal watchers. Here was Camilla, the woman once nicknamed the Rottweiler by Princess Diana for her tenacity and perceived aggression, attempting to assert dominance over a woman who was, by any measure, infinitely tougher. Diana had been a beautiful, fragile butterfly caught in a web of intrigue. Anne was a battle axe, forged in the fires of royal duty for over 5 decades. She had represented Great Britain at the Olympics. She had faced down a kidnapper who shot at her car with the legendary line, "Not bloody likely," and she had consistently been voted the hardest-working member of the royal family, often undertaking more engagements per year than even Charles himself. She was not a woman to be pushed aside. The tension reached a fever pitch at a private rehearsal dinner held at the palace just days before the coronation. It was supposed to be a chance for the immediate family to run through the complex logistics of the day. Instead, it became a battlefield. Anne arrived, her expression carved from granite. Charles, looking haggard and strained, attempted to act as a buffer, Camilla, dressed impeccably as always, offered Anne a cool, tight smile, which was not returned. The conversation around the dinner table was stilted, dominated by the logistics of carriage processions and robe lengths. But after the dessert plates were cleared, the storm finally broke. Accounts from those present vary, but the core of the confrontation remains the same. Anne, in her characteristically direct, no-nonsense tone, addressed the elephant in the room. She did not shout. Her voice was low, measured, and cut through the room like a blade. She spoke of duty, of service, and of respect. She reminded them, though she looked directly at Camilla as she said it, that the coronation was not a private party or a photo opportunity for a new queen, but a sacred religious ceremony to anoint a monarch chosen by God. She spoke of their mother, the queen, and how she would have been horrified at such petty maneuvering on a day that was supposed to be about the continuity of the crown. Camilla's carefully constructed poise cracked. She responded, her voice tight with suppressed fury, that times were changing, that the monarchy had to evolve, and that clinging to outdated traditions and figures was precisely what had made the institution seem irrelevant. The implication was clear. Anne was the outdated figure. The room went deathly silent. Cutlery stopped clinking. Glasses were frozen halfway to lips. Charles looked between his wife and his sister, his face a portrait of utter anguish, torn between the two most formidable women in his life. Anne did not flinch. She simply looked at Camilla, a long, penetrating look that seemed to see right through the queen's carefully applied makeup and expensive clothes to the insecure woman beneath. She did not need to win an argument. Her entire life was a testament to her position. She rose from the table, excused herself to her brother with a slight nod, and left the room without another word to Camilla. The dinner was over. The ceasefire, already in tatters, was well and truly dead. The gauntlet had been thrown, not with a flourish, but with the quiet, unshakable dignity of a woman who knew exactly who she was and what she represented. The morning of May 6, 2023, dawned gray and damp over London, a fittingly dramatic sky for a day of such immense historical weight. But inside the gilded state apartments of Buckingham Palace, a different kind of storm was brewing. The personal tensions of the past weeks had not magically resolved. They had merely been forced underground, simmering beneath a thin veneer of royal protocol. As Princess Anne arrived in her full military regalia as a gold stick-in-waiting, a personal bodyguard to the sovereign, the atmosphere in the room where the family was assembling was so thick it could be cut with a sword. She looked magnificent, resolute, a symbol of continuity and service. She exchanged a brief, formal greeting with her brother, who looked pale and anxious. For Camilla, Anne offered only the barest minimum of civility, a slight inclination of the head that was returned with a glacial stare. The carefully choreographed procession to Westminster Abbey was meant to be a display of unity, but the palace courtiers had worked overtime to ensure the family members who were barely on speaking terms were kept as far apart as possible. The king and queen would travel in the Diamond Jubilee state coach, a rolling gilded cage of splendor. Princess Anne and her husband, Sir Tim Lawrence, were placed in a separate carriage, far back in the procession. The visual message was clear, whether intentional or not. The new reign was about the king and his queen, and the siblings were now relegated to the background. As the abbey filled with 1,000 VIPs, foreign dignitaries, and heads of state, the tension back at the palace began to focus on a seemingly minor detail: the robes. The king and queen would wear robes of state of incredible weight and historical significance. Other senior royals, including Anne, had their own specific robes denoting their ranks and titles. But as the final moments before departure ticked away, a flunky approached the Princess Royal with a hushed, apologetic tone. There was, he stammered, a slight issue with the placement of her train. The team of pages assigned to carry it, young boys from elite schools dressed in scarlet and gold, had been reassigned. There appeared to be a shortage of staff to manage the full ceremonial display for the Princess Royal. It was a petty, last-minute slight, the kind designed to fluster and humiliate. Anne's response was typical. She looked at the young man, then at the pages scrambling around the Queen's impossibly long velvet train, and with a curt, practical nod, she dismissed them. She didn't need pages to hold up her train, she would manage. She was there to serve her brother, not to play dress-up. This small act of dignified defiance set the tone for the entire day inside the Abbey. As the service commenced, the ancient ritual unfolded with breathtaking beauty. The king was anointed behind a screen, hidden from view as holy oil was dripped onto his hands, breast, and head. He was presented with the orb, the scepter, and the rod. And finally, the Archbishop of Canterbury placed St. Edward's crown upon his head, and the cry went up, "God save the king!" The trumpets sounded, and the cheers echoed off the ancient stone walls. It was at this moment, the zenith of her husband's life, that Camilla's own moment arrived. She walked forward to be anointed and crowned queen. It was a moment she had been told for decades would never happen. As the Archbishop placed the Queen Mary's crown on her head, adorned with the controversial Koh-i-Noor diamond, she was officially the Queen of the United Kingdom. Her face was a picture of triumph, a serene smile playing on her lips. She had done it. She had overcome Diana's ghost, the public's scorn, and the disapproval of the late Queen. She was, at last, the First Lady of the realm. But even in her moment of ultimate victory, the ghost of the omission hung over the proceedings. As the newly crowned king and queen processed out of the Abbey, following by the senior members of the royal family in order of precedence, the world's media captured the image. There was the king, smiling and waving. Beside him, the queen, glowing with achievement. And directly behind them, walking alone with the quiet, unshakable dignity of a soldier, was the Princess Royal. Her face was unreadable, a mask of duty. She was not smiling, but she was there. She was present. She was the constant, the unshakable rock upon which so much of the family's public service was built. Camilla might have deleted her name from the program, but she could not delete her from the line of succession, from the history books, or from the hearts of those who valued true, unwavering service over ambition. The image of the two women, the triumphant queen and the stoic princess, told 1,000 words about the war that had just been fought and the uneasy peace that now settled over the House of Windsor. In the weeks and months that followed the coronation, a new, fragile normalcy settled over the royal family. The public saw the polished surface, joint engagements, smiling photographs, a united front. But beneath the surface, the tectonic plates continued to shift. The incident of the program was never discussed openly, but it was never forgotten. For King Charles, the episode served as a brutal lesson in the complexities of the family he now led. He loved his wife, that was beyond question, but he also deeply loved and respected his sister. He found himself in the impossible position of mediator between two women who viewed each other as rivals for the soul of the monarchy. Princess Anne, true to form, did something remarkable. She didn't complain to the press, she didn't leak stories, and she certainly didn't write a tell-all memoir. Instead, she threw herself into her work with even more vigor. In the first full year of her brother's reign, she undertook more royal engagements than any other family member, including the king and queen. She visited hospitals, schools, and military bases. She traveled overseas to promote British interests. She became, in the eyes of the public, the undisputed champion of royal duty. Her response to being written out of the narrative was to write herself back in, not with words, but with action. It was a masterclass in quiet revenge, the kind that leaves no fingerprints but changes the public perception irrevocably. Camilla, meanwhile, settled into her role as queen. She had achieved her life's ambition, but the crown was heavier than it looked. The public, while largely accepting of her, had not embraced her with the warmth they had for the late Queen, or even for Catherine, the Princess of Wales. There remained a segment of the population, and indeed the press, that would never fully forgive her past. She surrounded herself with loyal friends and family, her children and grandchildren becoming more visible in royal life. She pursued her pet projects, particularly her work on literacy and supporting victims of domestic violence. But every public appearance was scrutinized, every interaction with other members of the family analyzed for signs of friction. The unspoken truce between the Queen and the Princess Royal was tested many times. At state banquets and family gatherings, they were polite and professional. But they were never seen laughing together, never photographed in intimate conversation. The warmth that existed between Charles and Anne was noticeably absent when Camilla was present. It was as if an invisible wall had been erected, with Anne on one side, the very embodiment of the old monarchy, and Camilla on the other, the symbol of the new. Anne never spoke publicly of the program incident, but those close to her knew it had cut deep, not because of the insult to her ego, but because of the insult to the principles she held dear: loyalty, tradition, and family honor. Years later, looking back at the coronation, historians would point to that moment as a turning point. It was the day the monarchy officially transitioned from the Elizabethan era to the Carolean era, but it was also the day the internal dynamics shifted irrevocably. The incident was a reminder that the crown is not just an institution, but a family, with all the messy, complicated, and often painful dynamics that families entail. For King Charles, the memory of that moment in his study, staring at the proof of the program, remained a private scar. He knew that his wife had tried to diminish his sister, and he knew that his sister had risen above it with a dignity that he, despite his crown, could only admire. The four parts of this story, the discovery, the confrontation, the crowning, and the aftermath, were not just a series of events, but the defining chapters in the relationship between the two most powerful women in his life. And in the gilded halls of the palaces, where history is constantly being made and rewritten, the echo of that deleted name would be heard for a very long time to come.